everyone. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Julie. I'm just going to introduce Greg briefly. He was the MC at our last webinar about fire, the report from the burn zones. He also was very involved with the APLD's 2022 Slow the Burn seminar, which you can download from our chapter website for a small fee if you're interested in that. And I think you get CEUs for that if you do. But back to Greg. So he is the founder of California's own Landscape Design Incorporated and is a licensed design build landscape contractor who has been working with California native plants for over 30 years. His company has designed more than 800 residential, commercial, and institutional native landscapes in Southern California. Greg has been featured in many prominent publications and media outlets and he regularly gives presentations and workshops throughout California. In 2018, he was named the Horticulturalist of the Year by the San Diego Horticultural Society. One of Greg's specialties is fire-resistant native landscapes. His designs have experienced 25 fire events without the loss of a single home. His company was selected by the U.S. Navy to conduct a 4-year scientific research project studying the fire-resistant properties of properly designed native landscapes with very positive results. Also, Greg is co-author with Lucy Warren of the California Native Landscape, the Homeowners Design Guide to Restoring Its Beauty and Balance, and Drought-Defying California Garden, published by Timber Press. Greg, I'll turn it over to you now. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be presenting to you, and I appreciate your attendance here because I think we have a lot to talk about. And I was just participating in the testifying at the hearing for the California Board of Forestry Commission to make recommendations for upcoming legislation regarding Zone 0. And I'm just kind of flummoxed by what I'm hearing. So I want to kind of share with you our insights and our experience. And you gave me a great introduction already. I'll just say that one of the things that also informs our approach with these wind-driven fires is that I was an aerospace engineer prior to becoming a landscape contractor. So I have a background in aerodynamics, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics. So I think it's really informed the way we interpret what's going on in our recommendations. And as she mentioned, we've got a couple books out there. This one is out of print, but still available used. It was written as a textbook, and then this one's still on the shelves. Drought-Defying California Garden. All right, let's get into it. So here's Altadena. And one of the things I want people to notice is just how green it is. All right, these yards are all still green. For the most part, it wasn't vegetation and residential lots that were burning down houses. It was embers flying in from the surrounding wild areas being propelled by winds, in the 60 to 80 mile an hour range. Although one other bad actor that is a plant are the Mexican what's the word I'm looking for? Unstripped Mexican fan palms. Those fronds in those skirts detach and just become these 4-foot flaming frisbees flying at 40 miles an hour, and then also just tons of embers coming off the petioles and the crown and that, and they really should not have any place in these communities. So that is one example of plant that is problematic. But in general, your hydrated trees and shrubs may actually have helped save some of the houses. So one of the important concepts right off the bat is fire resiliency functions from the house outward rather than the landscape inward. Everybody is so obsessed with vegetation, the plants, and really what's generally saving homes is new construction that's fire hardened. And those communities generally do pretty well in these fire events. Not a beautiful community like this with up to 100-year-old houses that are very closely packed together and were constructed from materials long before fire codes really existed. So the way we measure the flammability of vegetation is by measuring the live fuel moisture content. That's always been the indicator of the beginning and in severity of the upcoming fire season. And that was one of the prime data sets that we were using when we did the 4-year scientific research project for the Navy. And it's what's used by CAL FIRE and everybody else to determine when the fire season has begun. And through that function, it really supports the idea that vegetative flammability, it's much more about hydration than plantless, except for maybe some of the junipers and Mexican fan palms. And even if Mexican fan palms are really kept manicured and watered, same thing with junipers, they may even have some fire resistance too. But anyway, in general, it's all about, hydration. And the corollary that it takes so little water to actually hydrate a native plant. And drought tolerant native plants are designed to hang on to water, okay, and to be incredibly efficient with it. So, whereas, I don't know, a Raphiolepis might need to be watered at least a couple times a week to really be at a sufficient hydration level. A lot of plants in this community, the ceanothus and the manzanitas and that, would be adequately hydrated with once every 8 to 10 days of water. So, quite a bit less water required, and you get all the other benefits of habitat and beauty and regional identity. Now, this is huge, guys. This is what's really huge. And what I'm afraid that I'm seeing with the commission is they're not really looking at these as wind-driven fires. They tend to model them very basically as fuel-driven fires. And the agencies and ordinances advocating for total brush clearance may actually be contributing to far more vulnerability. So the factor of wind, well, and I'll show you a table in a minute here, is huge. And it is the difference between a fire that can be contained and a fire that requires massive levels of evacuation where equipment burns up and people get killed. So yeah, it's apparent that researchers are not investigating the significant aerodynamics and thermodynamics of wind-driven fire. So what's getting ignored is the potential for hydrated trees and shrubs to act as ember catchers, ember coolers, create turbulence that disturbs the flow of embers, ember blockers. No, they're just looked at fuel. They're just modeled as fuel. And, what happens if you clear all this quote unquote fuel from around your house? Well, I can tell you that that hydrated fuel is going to be a lot less flammable, especially in these older structures, than the wood they're constructed from. Okay. So it's like the paradigm is just kind of not there. Even when it comes to mulches, up north, they're banning redwood mulch, shredded redwood bark, or gorilla hair as quickly as they can, even though it's, especially for native landscapes, one of the best mulches to emulate the natural duff layer that forms, and also to maintain hydration and health and promote the soil ecology. And it's because they don't understand that it needs to be matted down. And when it's matted down, I'll show you pictures, it is not a real high flame length at all. Yeah, so hydrated oak sycamores, even manzanitas. I had a home saved by manzanitas, mature manzanitas, right up against the eaves. I didn't plant them there. I think I kind of did a double take when I saw that, but from the Pines fire, it came up through Julian, burned down both neighbors, and kept on going, and the house was saved with this grove of manzanitas all around it. Okay, this is something that's interesting too, because a lot of these insurance companies, they're not happy unless you've cleared 200 to 300 feet around structures. Well, in this paper in 2012, John Keeley, who's my research partner, he's a world's leading fire ecologist, says there's no additional structure protection provided by clearing beyond 100 feet, even on steep slopes. And the most important treatment zone, the sweet spot, is 16 to 58 feet. Okay. Yeah, complete clearance around homes results in total exposure to wind-driven ember attack without perturbance. And then once you've cleared all this vegetation, it gets recolonized almost immediately by annual flashy fuel weed. That's called type conversion. They're not native and they're unbelievably flammable and they're flashy, which means they all go up simultaneously. And then the soil gets desiccated, you get an absolute complete loss of habitat, you get increased erosion, certainly a loss of regional identity and unhindered exposure to wind-driven fires. And I just added this table here. This was out of John Keeley's research on the Camp Fire, which was Paradise. And many of you have heard about that horrible conflagration in 2018. Well, this is an interesting comparison between what we would call fuel-dominated fires versus wind-dominated fires. Okay, and notice a couple things. In the first group of fuel-dominated fires, look at the months these fires occurred, July and August, all right? Generally, you're not getting those offshore flows during that time. Notice that also these were kind of naturally caused fires, lightning, some bozo with a campfire and lightning. And also notice that almost all of this is occurring in Northern California. That's where you tend to actually see more of the natural lightning caused forest fires, all right? And what's really interesting is this column here, lives lost. 0, 0, 0, 0. And in structures lost, you had 0, 1. The rim fire was huge, that was 112. And the rough fire near Fresno was 4. Okay, so those are what we call fuel-dominated fires. Any of you living in San Diego County or even in LA, you're seeing a lot of fuel-driven fires that are being either lit by arsonists, power lines, or weed abatement equipment sparking, ironically. But now let's shift over to wind-dominated fires, right? And these are huge, catastrophic events. The first two, I was directly involved. I had structures and landscapes directly involved here in San Diego, the Cedar and Witch Fire. Okay, these things are happening in fall. That's when your Santa Ana's kicked up, October, December, November. And he even recorded how many days those Santa Ana wind events lasted for. Notice the Thomas Fire here, like near Montecito and that, it was a 10-day event, okay? And the thing I want you to look at is the cause of the fires. Well, that Cedar Fire was some guy who was out hunting, got lost, and decided to shoot a flare in the middle of the Santa Ana. Ended up killing 15 people and losing 2,700 structures. And notice that every other catastrophic fire since then was caused by power lines. And these are power lines that are arcing because of the force of the wind. And look at the lives lost, okay? Generally, they can contain these fuel-driven fires. when it's a wind event, oh my gosh, it's just like you're doing mass evacuations, you're trying to get equipment, you're trying to get people out of there, and it can be just a horrible event. And you can see how many lives were lost. The Tubbs fire in Sonoma for you Northern California people, that was a big deal. The Thomas and the Woolsey fires, fortunately, didn't lose that many people, but then you come to Campfire in Paradise, 88 people lost, 18,800 structures lost. I mean, these are big numbers, okay? And there's a huge contrast. The problem is that most of the discourse seems to be about fuel-driven models, okay? And they're not taking into account what's going on aerodynamically, physically with these wind-dominated fires. They're ember-dominated fires, okay? So let's talk about some roles of vegetation. This came out in LA Times a couple months ago. It was written by a couple fire scientists, Luca Carmignani and Max Moritz. And this is in Palisades. And notice what they're documenting here. This is before the fire, okay? That is a hydrated green hedge, actually happens to be impinging into zone 0. Well, this is pre-fire, and this is post-fire, okay? So the structure upwind is gone. The hedge is singed on that side, but still green on the other side, and you have an intact structure there, okay? This is significant. We've been saying this. I've been talking about this for 30 years, okay? And we're saying it over and over and over again, that vegetation, if it's properly managed and hydrated, can actually help save homes. Hydrated trees, deflecting, catching, cooling, and blocking embers. Hedges like this, okay? Well, I just added this today too. The quality of the photos isn't great because I pulled it directly from the report. This was in John's research paper, John Keeley's research paper up on Paradise there. And he, even back then, 2018, was noting that houses that had just been completely cleared around were just completely incinerated, just gone. And then other homes here that most of the vegetation had been removed from, very little standing in the way of the fire front, gone. Well, then you have these folks here have a beautiful large house that was completely intact, and it was surrounded by hydrated incense cedars. Clearly they're hydrated. There's a lawn in front of it, okay? And at this resolution, it's hard to see that beyond the trees there in the distance, it looks like Hiroshima. It's just absolute, complete devastation. So this is the kind of things that we're seeing. Max and Luca are seeing it. Even, what's his name? Kent. Sorry. Doug Kent. Yeah, couldn't remember his first name. Doug has written a lot of books on fire escaping, and he is also noticing after these latest LA fires that trees appear to be saving homes, mature hydrated trees. And here's kind of an interesting photo on the left here. This is a section of Paradise, and I want you to notice the trees surrounding it. Are they burned? No, they're actually green. And notice, so the fire came from the right side here, from the east, maybe a little from the northeast. But note that any structure still standing were on that side, biased towards that side, the east side where the fire was coming from. And also notice the trees adjacent to some of these homes, okay? John even mentioned that other parts of Paradise, the homes that were right up against the tree line were the ones that survived, and the homes beyond that had burned, and it was kind of confusing. They weren't quite sure what was going on, but being an aerospace engineer, been working with aerodynamics, I'm looking at it and say, oh my gosh, I realize what happened here. So the green belt around this community was comprised mostly of pine trees that were in the same size class. They'd all been, it may have been clear cut and replanted or agged, I don't know what, but you have this solid mass, this impenetrable mass of pine trees. Well, when those wind-driven embers hit that mass, it was like a solid block, and it went straight up, probably 3 times the height of it, right over the pine trees, and then on the other side of the block that came down and boom, right into the community. So it points up an interesting factor in the approach of these sort of creating green belts around communities. But it also shows that you want different size classes of vegetation surrounding your communities, because you don't want to act like toy soldiers. You don't want to act like a wall that the embers can go right over. You want to have valleys and chasms and tunnels and with blocking at the end of those features, because you're using different sized trees and shrubs in different areas, but everybody's kind of eventually overlapping as you go perpendicular, as the wind comes in and you're going down slope and you're hitting these features. You want to be able to go down around, but then finally be blocked at some point. And that's what I believe we need to be doing, because in these, you talk about zones. Well, in these closely packed communities, you barely get into zone 1, let alone zone 2. So zone 2 needs to be a green belt all around the community instead of ice plant, right? The places we plant ice plant, the slopes around the community, that needs to be oaks and sycamores and Catalina cherries and, big coffee berries and toyon and lemonade berry. Anyway, just to create different size classes, and it all needs to be lightly hydrated. And that hydration makes all the difference in the world when it comes to fire behavior. So I went and looked back at this site. This is 2018. I looked at it on Google Earth, and this is what it looks like today. I was actually rather shocked. Certainly they haven't rebuilt there yet, but also look that they've removed all the trees. And instead of looking maybe to thin them, to create and maybe plant some more understory shrubs and perimeters, they just mowed everything down. Next fire comes, if they ever rebuild, what's going to protect the community? I was pleased to see it looked like they left oak trees to the north, but you really need this kind of size class vegetation to the east, which is to the right. And so, yeah, right now it's just, if they build back, it's going to be fully exposed, just 100% exposed. And it's kind of depressing to look at. I feel sorry for these people. It was horrible. Yeah, speaking about ice plant, guys, so many people would be advocating planting ice plant. Well, guess what? It burns. There's a close-up of it burning. All right. This is a car fire. I think this is along the 94 freeway or something. And boom, just lit right up. Not only is there like this dead thatch underneath it that's incredibly flammable, but the flames with these succulents, the succulents aren't really designed to hold on to moisture in heat and fire events like our drought tolerant native shrubs are. they just boil off the water, and then whatever's left over just burns. Okay. So we have to do better than surrounding our communities with ice plant. This is a free way, but it sure illustrates the point. All right, well, let's talk a little about fire ecology here. And when we hit that 30-minute mark, just give me a holler, guys, and we'll take a break. So let's looking at ignition sources. Well, prior to human colonization, what were our natural ignition sources? Well, lightning, right? I mean, beyond that, what do we have that's natural? It's going to naturally start fires. Oh, wait, well, there's one more.
Good, I'm on a webinar.
Volcanoes.
Can I call you back in a little, or is this urgent?
Julie, you're muted. And Greg, we are getting
Uh-huh.
to the 30 minutes. Julie.
All right, let me finish with this slide.
Okay, something
You don't
wrong?
mind, and we'll
You
take a
think
break.
so?
Sorry, I can't mute Julie. Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, it's you mean you got an alert from your okay. Yeah,
Right.
I can. Okay,
Julie.
sorry, I'm the tech expert on this, and Lauren's not home.
And Julie,
I'll go
oh my
look right
goodness.
at
All
6
right,
o'clock.
everyone just bear with us for a minute.
Okay, bye-bye.
Julie, you're not muted. Okay. All right, Greg, continue.
All right.
Sorry. All right, Greg, continue.
So
Sorry.
beyond volcanoes, lightning is our main source of ignition, especially in Southern California. How often do you have lightning storms during Santa Ana wind events? All right. It'd be a rare confluence of factors that would allow a lightning started fire to dwell long enough to be carried by a Santa Ana wind and fall. And so the bottom line is that the vast majority are human caused. And in a survey of all Southern California counties from 1990 to 2016, 97 to 100% of all the fires were human caused. So why don't we take a little break, and then we can go over ignition sources, maybe answer questions if people have it.
And I have to apologize. Sorry about that. I didn't know if I took my earbuds off to answer my neighbor, this would happen. So I apologize.
It's okay. Greg, we had a question about, sorry, the acronym for the plants, the moisture level for the plants. And I'm sorry, I forgot to write that down as well.
Yeah. The acronym is LFMC. LFMC, which stands for Live Fuel Moisture Content. And it's basically a measure of the percentage of moisture contained within leaves.
Okay. And is there an easy place that we can Google that and find a list or find a way of measuring that?
Well, it's measured in real time. So this is stuff that you would go out into the wildlands, and you would take samples of various types of vegetation. I think one of their favorite is chamise. And you would weigh it green, and then you would, the leaves, you would weigh it green, then you would put it into a drying oven to totally desiccate it, and then weigh what's left. And typically when things are hydrated, you're around 100 or more % water weight. I've seen 150% water weight, okay? Well, during the winter, that's easy to achieve when you've got your natural storms, but in native landscapes, we do that with light supplemental irrigation, which we'll talk about. And it makes all the difference. And our research for the Navy, we actually use that as our main data point. And we measured, lightly irrigated planted native landscapes, that LFMC, versus a natural control that was also located on these research properties. So, and then we fed that into a supercomputer, and I've got the results of that coming up.
Okay, thanks.
Stephanie,
Go ahead,
those
Julie.
2 questions you answered
Uh-huh.
Might be good to let everyone know that
Oh, okay.
information, don't
Sorry,
you
I wasn't
think?
sure. Can everyone see those or not?
I'm not sure if everyone can see it. I think they can, but it
Okay.
might be nice to go over those.
All right. Well, do
I
we
don't,
want to get back to the presentation and I'll just keep track of these and
yeah, that's
okay.
great.
Okay, so let's go ahead and continue. So what are some of our man-made ignition sources? Well, arson. We've got a lot of sick puppies running around lighting fires. That's all I'll say about that. Huge, and even underscored by that table I showed you, electric fire, power lines, okay? I did a lot of the survey work for down here for SDG&E after the Witch Creek fire here, and it was pretty astounding. You could see exactly where these fires would start at the base of power poles with transformers, and it would just propagate out from there. Smoking, that's still a factor, although hopefully less. Trash burning. The Pumashaw fire in Palomar Mountain was started by somebody who decided to burn their trash in the middle of a Santa Ana wind event. Cars, bad catalytic converters or dragging chains. Those you'll see all kinds of fires from time to time right along the roadway, and it'll be at regular intervals as they get sparked. And the children playing with fire, that was a huge factor in our 2014 North County fires. There was a 14-year-old girl running around lighting fires. And then ironically, one of the also prominent reasons for starting fires is sparking landscape equipment hitting rocks or metal objects, usually and ironically in the service of fire weed abatement. This was like less than a mile from my office, and you know, God forbid they should think to bring a few 5-gallon buckets of water out there, or maybe string a hose where they've got, metal bladed equipment working in flashy fuels with rocks. So that's the recommendation on that one. And then planning. Let's look at what's happening in these communities as far as planning. This is in South Escondido along Lake Hodges, and all these homes are lost located right on the ridge. That's where we like to put homes because of the views, right? But you can see if you look, there's areas that these were actually already cleared too. They had done their homework. They'd done the clearing, right? It didn't help them a bit. In fact, it may have hindered because again, there were no trees or anything to block or disturb ember flow. So yeah, and like in other countries like Australia, they usually try to set the residences back from the edge, and often will put in like a little park intervening, especially at the end of box canyons like this. And here's another bit of poor planning. This is in Rancho Bernardo, and I'll zoom in on that. If you look and see this peninsula right here, it was surrounded on 3 sides by vegetation. It was just a 2-lane road coming in and out, and the fire hit it from all sides. It was amazing that everybody got out of here alive, but they couldn't even get the fire engines in there because of all the evacuations. So again, we don't want to create situations like this through poor planning. And yeah, it devastated almost all those homes. Now, here's an early kind of version of a native green belt that saved this community. I think they overthinned, to be honest with you, but there at least was stands of natural vegetation that had been maintained. All right, and then you had sort of a fire break around the outside of the community. And then beyond that, I want you to notice things like this groups of trees that are singed on the fire side and green on the structural side. Here, same thing over here, okay? And so our green belts would be a little denser than this. So you have more blocking and catching going on. But what the purpose is not necessarily be the final salvation for the community, but allow enough time for fire crews to safely get set up on the perimeter here and fight the fire, which is what the case was here. They came in through this access road here, and it had been slowed down enough that they could set up a defensible perimeter. And then, of course, all the vegetation in there is green and hydrated. And, we're pushing farther and farther out into our wildlands, right? And the thing about home hardening, as I mentioned earlier, it starts there. Fire resilience starts with home hardening and from the home out, not the landscape in. So what are some of those features? Well, boxed in eaves with vertical vents that are screened over. Windows that are metal framed and double paned, especially to the north and east sides where the fire usually is coming, the wind-driven fire is usually coming from. The vents need to be all screened over so that embers don't get into the attic. And your roofing, and I believe this is required by law now, has to be Class B or better, composite or tile roof. And a lot of the homes that burned in Scripps in 2003 were still shake shingle. In fact, I think it was originally required in that community. Well, that didn't serve them well. And then the wildlands, there they are. We're just encroaching, and they want us to just completely destroy all of nature. It's like, well, why the heck did you move there in the first place? Let's just destroy all of our natural habitat and beauty. All right, it's zone time. And this is getting expanded hugely by the insurance companies. And I'm telling you, it's a fool's errand, but let's cover it. So right now we've got zone 0, which is the first 5 feet surrounding the house. And basically the next is zone 1 or A, usually 30 to 50 feet. That's sort of your garden and lawn. And then zone 2 is usually the wild areas beyond, okay? And they're pushing zone 2 out to 300 feet. And they're clearing, again, they're removing all protection. Well, zone 0, right now it's being, this Board of Forestry Commission that I testified to yesterday, they're trying to come up with recommendations for the legislation covering this, and most of the expert witnesses are coming from the insurance industry. They're using the insurance industry's research arm, which is the IBHS, and they're doing this stuff in South Carolina. Not at all representative of our native ecology here in California. They're drawing bad conclusions from it, but they're using it to fuel the recommendations. And the problem is that one of the goals for the legislation is to create an environment which everybody can get insured, right? But it's the insurance companies that are driving the requirements, and the insurance company's data is really bad. I mean, it's just not representative of what really goes on, and not only may be ineffective, it may be actually counterproductive. So let's look at actual zone 0 in action. So I kind of laugh because you go see these fire presentations, a lot of times what's missing is fire, okay? Well, that's not going to be the case here. We've had 25 fire events that our landscapes and homes have been been involved in. And I went out immediately after the fires, did a lot of photographic documentation, interviews with neighbors that lost their homes, just to find out what was working and what's not, and what it's really like. So this is Witch Creek fire. This is an example of zone 0. It's actually probably a 4-foot apron of concrete. And also this shade structure back here is metal. To me, it was effective. You can see the scorch marks along the edge. You don't see any scorch marks on the white stucco here. And this was a damn hot fire, okay? For one thing, that streak on the back hillside there, that was a metal water tank that melted. And this was lawn that literally burned. The lawn burned. That's how hot this was. And here's another apron, a very early one we did around 2000. This was only like 3 feet wide. If I were doing this again, I probably wouldn't be planting these manzanitas right in this eave zone. Although the eaves are very short. They're only like 24 inches and they're boxed in. And they did fine fight 2 fires, actually. I probably wouldn't be putting the mulch down here. I'd just be running this gravel all the way out to the pathway here. But having said that, it did great, no damage. The house totally survived, and the landscape survived. And the difference was it was all hydrated. And we think the apron may have helped, but I don't know. We're seeing kind of conflicting results. And this is one of our first aprons we did. Is an 8 to 12 foot decomposed granite apron. Sorry. And not unattractive. I mean, I think it really creates a nice setting for this sort of ranchero home. And also notice that the roof is metal, okay? And it's been through 3 wildland fires. And the landscape itself is low, it's well spaced, it's irrigated, okay? So it's done very well in fire. The Witch Creek fire in 2007, which was the second fire, there was a little bit of damage in the back corner where the kitchen was, where ironically we hadn't done any landscaping and there were no trees planted, okay? So I've got pictures of that to show you what that looked like. And here, this is fairly new construction, 2023, I think, just showing a 5-foot gravel apron all the way around the house. We pruned this existing Sambucus elderberry away from that zone. And of course, they have party board siding, metal frame double pane windows and doors. Okay, their eaves are boxed in and screened with vents that are screened. So yeah, it's surrounding it with beautiful chaparral around this house. It should do just fine. And this is actually a retrofit. This was a home that we landscaped a couple years ago. Fire inspectors were giving her a hard time, so we went in, removed some vegetation, and created a 5-foot apron of DG around the back of the house. Again, it's not unattractive, right? And you can see, I don't know if you can see up here, but the eaves are only a couple 18, 24 inches out. But yeah, that's how you do a retrofit, basically. All right, you can we transplant some of the plants over into here, and I left some. If need be, we can cut these back if they really complain. But so far, so good. But then we have stuff like this, right? So this is another home in Witch Creek, and these were hydrated plants, all right? And they singed, but you can see the thing is they're not developing enough radiant heat to even scorch the bright white stucco behind it, all right? So for us, and it's shown by scientific evidence, it's all about hydration rather than plantless, okay? And we see this over and over and over again, like here, okay? Hydrated plants, they didn't even burn, right? This is another area of Ramona here. And yeah, I had some plants, this is early going. This is, early 2000s. And, we weren't really up as much as we are now on creating aprons. But again, the plants are fairly intact, actually. And again, they were watered. And yes, there was some mulch. There was actually mulch down, and it smoldered, but again, we didn't get any scorching on the stucco. Okay. And here's another area of the same house, and same thing. We had plants and mulch. And actually the darkening of the stucco really isn't flame damage. It's actually water that had splashed and had created mud on the stucco. But the plants are hydrating closer to the house. They're green. Okay, for the most part. All right, so that's zone 0. That's where all the controversy is. We're working on it. They've got a meeting coming up. They're coming down to Southern California. And by the way, all this stuff is coming from Northern California. And, we've been living with wind-driven fire all our lives and for thousands of years before that. And we've learned a thing or two, and yet all the research, it appears, all the recommendations, all the legislation are coming out of Northern California. So we finally convinced them they need to hold a meeting, a hearing down here. So they're going to be meeting in LA, I think on the 18th of September. And there was kind of a push to get them to select me to be an expert witness on this thing, which I'd be more than honored to do and could really show them some stuff. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. We may just have to give up on zone 0 and just, DG concrete gravel, but we'll see. And certainly in zone 2, you don't want to end up with this, right? You don't want to be this guy, all right? Okay, literally clearing the bare ground for hundreds of feet around the house. This will all come back in flashy fuel grasses and weeds that are not native, that will knock out the native ecology. They'll take over, and they'll be ready to burn every August, September. Okay. And what is protecting this home? He thinks he's done everything right. He's removed all the fuel, right? Well, let's look at aerodynamics, right? You're going to have what's called laminar flow hitting this house. And I've got pictures of that in action, actually. And those embers will come in thick as the Fire Falls of Yosemite going sideways at 80 miles an hour. And it's like that home will be in a blast furnace. So we have to change our paradigms, folks. Right? We just have to make some adjustments in how we perceive what's going on. Now here is a home. This survived a fire. This was a desert landscape, so it naturally had a gravel mulch around it. And of course, it's sort of a Santa Fe structure with not a lot of exposed wood. And so it did absolutely fine. I don't even think the fire really impinged into the landscape. We have a few instances of that too. The fires went completely around our landscapes. And in zone 1, people think it's usually this giant wall of flames that comes through. No, it's actually usually spot fires. Can be a wall of flames, but in general, it's a wall of embers and spot fires. Okay. And the sad truth is flying embers and unfortunately burning animals can actually carry that right into your structure there. And the other factor is wood fences and wood debris around the house and wood sheds. Okay. One of the things I like about the upcoming recommendations is they're telling people to remove all flammable materials from around the house, from at least 5 feet away from the house. I couldn't agree more. And this is a fence on fire. Okay. Fences are serious burners. And if you've ever been near a fence fire, it is hot. I mean, where that Jeep or whatever is over there, he would be feeling, I mean, almost unbearable heat, okay? And so what the wood fences do is it just ricks it right into the house, right? And then part of the legislation, they're looking at telling people to remove their wood fences within 5 feet of a house. For me, the main thing is actually where the fence actually turns in and contacts the home, like at the garage on the side of the house where you have the gates wood, the fence is wood. And this is what happens. It wicks this in right into your eaves, man. And gets up in the attic and you're off to the races. So at least we recommend that that portion of the fence, if not the whole fence, be constructed from non-flammable materials. You know, metal fences, stucco concrete, or even these kind of things. This is pretty cool. You've seen these precast concrete panels. They look really nice. They're a little expensive and they're a little heavy. So you build these things up in sections, okay? Because each of those sections weighs 200 to 300 pounds, all right? And you're supported by like a concrete metal post here. So it's hefty. I mean, it's almost like a bomb shelter, but you know, you can see in this photo here, here's one with a burning fence, and you can see the contrast there, the concrete precast versus the wooden fence structure. Also in this first zone, zone 1, beyond this 5 foot zone 0, you know, we put in our conventional landscaping, our grass. It's regularly irrigated, usually around once a week, especially for natives. Non-natives, it's usually 2 to 3 times a week, which is awful, but natives are totally valid in this zone, okay? You just want to select natives, can handle a little extra water. You create a beautiful landscape and you can do your lawn. And in this case, it's a lawn substitute from a native sedge called Carex progressilis. We expected in this La Jolla garden to come and take pictures of a beautifully manicured lawn, but they love this hummocky natural look. And so they just said, look, we're not going to mow it. Dog loves it. We love it. Beautiful meadow. But you can mow it too. Okay. Even smells like a lawn when you mow it, but you're watering it about once or twice a week and you're mowing it once or twice a month. Okay. So it's lower maintenance and it's every bit of lawn. All right. Now we've gone beyond zone 1. Now we're out into the wilderness, zone 2 or B. Starts 30 to 50 feet, extends 100 feet from the house, but 100 feet or probably 300 feet now beyond the house. All right. It's just getting ridiculous. And you'll encounter 2 things. Either you'll have existing vegetation that you want to modify for fire resilience, or you might have an open area that you want to do some native plantings of ground covers, shrubs, and trees. Again, if we're in a tight-knit community, this zone is actually your green belt going around, your ice plant area. That should be consisting of planted vegetation of the size classes we discussed. So let's talk about managing existing vegetation. This is not native. This is not what your native landscape is going to look like. That is 100% mustard, fillery grasses, ready to burn. The only thing native is that oak tree in the background here. And this is what we were confronted with on this property. And it's a 10-acre property, so we had lots of room to work. And cleaned this all up and restored it, right? And provided light irrigation, thunderstorm level irrigation. The natives would say not only tolerate, they love. Okay, and it's also important to address the existing chaparral plants and thin them to no more than 50% coverage, and remove all the dead branches and leaves. And then make sure that your weeds are controlled so you don't have a fire ladder. And this is, again, cedar fire right here. One of my clients' properties that had a modified fuel zone. That is a Mission Manzanita. Cedar fire came through here. It just smoldered in the natural mulch. There were no weeds to burn. The limbs aren't even scorched. Look at that, algae and lichen right there, completely untouched. The tree itself looked completely healthy and green and unfazed. The only way you could tell the fire affected it was it burned out this deadwood knot at the base of the plant. Everything else was just wonderful. That's a cedar fire. That was a major fire. Now, one thing that we also recommend is creating a clearance between the understory vegetation and the lower branches of a tree. And the rule of thumb is to go 3 times the height of whatever the surrounding vegetation is. So if it's 18 inches high, this is 3 times 18, 4.5 feet. So the total limb up is about 6 feet. Okay. Now I'm running into an issue right now with the city of Vista. Their fire department is being especially zealous. And I've got some Monterey cypress that I planted 50 to 100 feet away from the house. And they're only now about 8 or 9 feet tall, and they want them pruned up by 6 feet. And it's like, this isn't practical. Those trees are not going to burn down the house. So I'm going to go back to them and I'm going to say, okay, can we prune a little less, or can we maybe remove some of the surrounding understory plants? Would that get us around that? Fortunately, they're Monterey cypress that get big eventually, and they can handle having a 6-foot trunk. But right now it's going to look ridiculous, like little fire pokers. Anyway, so that's practical application. There are some of the things you run into. Thinning. Okay, so this is how to thin vegetation. This is maritime chaparral, and this is what it looks like when it's been thinned by about 50%. One of the important things we do is we actually grind up and deposit the tree trimmings back down as mulch. Okay, because when you open it up, it's going to want to come back in weeds. But it opens up access areas. We expose these Dudleas that were growing here in the shade. I don't know if they made it or not. They might have gotten fried, but it's an Encinitas, so maybe not. But yeah, this is kind of an example. This is maybe even a little too over cleared, more than 50%. But then in these zones, you can have so much fun, right? Because then you can run paths. You can put sitting areas, maybe a bridge, maybe a bird bath, maybe plant some little low volatility perennials for color along the pathways. You basically carve out a mature native landscape from impenetrable chaparral that is fire resilient and full of birds and butterflies, and becomes your own private park, your own private preserve. Okay, just takes a little imagination. All right. If you bulldoze this thing, you'd be left with a field of grass, just like what happened all around all those homes on Paradise. And this is a real good example of what chaparral that's been thinned by about 50% looks like. And I can tell you that CAL FIRE loved this. They love this example. And again, they've been pruned up. All the dead vegetation has been removed. The trimmings have been mulched up and put back down on the ground. And it's your own private park. You can walk barefoot through it. Okay. And you wouldn't walk barefoot through one of those flashy fuel weedy sites, but this thing here, the indigenous folks could walk 200 miles barefoot through. So that is an example of what, thinning by 40 to 50% actually should look like. And you have different size classes of trees and that. And it's just gorgeous and it's free. I mean, the cost to maintain it certainly, but $150,000 an acre, not here. Now, you may also have the situation where that zone 2 has been cleared, you got lots of weeds or it's bare dirt, and you want to plant it back. And we highly recommend creating your own little green belt of native vegetation with trees and shrubs and ground covers. Predominantly evergreen plants, we find that those will hydrate better, things like toyon and lemonade berry and oaks and cattleya cherries, but also sycamores are wonderful in fire. And you do different size classes, mix it up. So you have blocks eventually, but you can allow some of the stuff to come through and penetrate in a little bit and get caught instead of facing a massive monolithic block that just drives the air and the embers right up over the top and down. One of our favorite ways. So these zones we irrigate, guys. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't irrigate, especially overhead irrigate a native plant, because how does Mother Nature do it? This has been key to the fire resistance in our landscapes. That light hydration is everything. And we're only watering less than an inch of equivalent precipitation a month during the summer months. Well, in one of these rare thunderstorms, we could get an inch in an afternoon, right? So it's well within the tolerance limits of the plants. It's acting like a thunderstorm. It's watering the whole ecology instead of individual plants like a drip system would do, because this is all supported by a very complex, very important soil biology. So let me stop there. Let everybody take another break, and any questions, and we'll go move on from there.
Greg, we have a couple. So yeah, if people want to go get some water or something, Nan just asked when we do get summer, sorry, when do we get summer thunderstorms? And yes, we don't get them very often, but occasionally we'll get one or two, right? And that's really all it takes to add that little bit of hydration. Just,
Yeah, so
rain.
down in Southern California, they tend to be rather infrequent, in our valleys and where most of our development is. But the point is, when we do get that rare event, does it kill the native plants? Does it kill the chaparral? No, they do great. They love it. Okay. They're a lot more resilient. They're a lot more resilient than we give them credit for. The problem with our native landscapes is suburban pests and pathogens, which is a whole nother presentation, and especially Argentina has a whole nother presentation. Okay. But it's not this little bit of water we're giving that kills them. In fact, they love it. They absorb it well. It also is important for matting down the organic mulch, the gorilla hair that we use, so that it goes from 3 to 4 inches thick down to less than an inch thick. It's like a carpet, and it actually adheres to the soil too. And so at that point, it's very poorly oxygenated, and it smolders with maybe 1 to 2 inch flame, if that. Now I've got pictures of it. I'll show you guys.
So we did have a question about using mulch in zone 0, which I think you addressed, but in 5 words or less, do you want to say something more about that?
Yeah, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get ahead of this legislation. And so appearance is everything. I'll show you how the redwood mulch actually performed in the cedar fire in zone 0. But why tempt fate? Especially if you're doing no new construction, just go ahead and do your apron all the way around, just like I showed you, and that'll keep you out of trouble. And it doesn't look like it's going to go. The zone 0 is going to expand beyond 5 feet. Okay. And again, the problem there, the difficulty is dealing with existing landscapes and how to deal with all the vegetation.
Right. So Debbie is since we're on irrigation here, Debbie is asking if you suggest MP rotator nozzles over drip in zone 1 as well.
Absolutely. I for native plants especially, and this is really got a native plant bias here.
Right.
Native plants do much better with natural overhead rainfall, if you will, because look, you're not just watering individual plants. That's the least of it. You're watering a whole mycorrhizal fungal ecology that permeates the upper 3 feet of the soil and attaches to the roots of those systems and binds them up like one giant organism. So you want diffuse overhead watering for a lot of reasons. Dust the plants off too. They're so drought tolerant they get dusty, Right. So no, that is, and again, installed over 800 landscapes in Southern California, guys. And we have a pretty good idea of what works. And drip system can really shorten the lives of plants. It can encourage ants. It can encourage pathogens. You end up, instead of being an aerobic fungal ecology, it becomes a anaerobic bacterial ecology overnight.
On one other irrigation question, Magda asked how much and how should you hydrate mature oak trees in the summer? So I think that's in reference to the oak root fungus, and just if you would like to
Yeah,
go a
so
little bit more about that.
I'm not losing oaks to irrigation, to be honest with you guys. I do plantings under them all the time. The reason the oak root fungus is moving around, again, this is another slideshow, but they're vectors, and the vectors are primarily Argentine ants and scale, okay? And they're little typhoid Marys, and they're inoculating these things directly into their root system because they nest in the roots. So none of this is common knowledge. I'm trying to make it common knowledge, but that's the main problem. Having said that, if you have a nice deep oak leaf litter around your tree, I try to maintain at least 4 inches. That's going to stop most of this overhead irrigation anyway, which surprisingly is what the redwood mulch does too. And at that point, you're not worried about saturating the soil. What you're doing is you're creating a mulch vapor barrier that retards evaporation at very low level of humidity in the soil structure. So that's what natives love, you know. So, like I say, the conventional wisdom's kind of, when it comes to natives and fire and stuff, it's just you take anything you learn in ornamental horticulture and kind of throw it out the window. I'm sorry to say.
Right. We've also had a lot of questions about houses, about like mission style houses with big eaves and double paned windows. And I just wanted to note, I put a link in some of as answers to that to the Sustainable Defensible Space website, which has a lot of information about house hardening, because we will have a whole other webinar on that. And I believe that Cheryl in Sacramento is going to be focusing on that in their upcoming webinar. So we're really focusing on plants and landscapes here. So I'm sorry if we're not answering your questions directly, but do look at the Sustainable Defensible Space site.
There's a lot of resources and information on that now, and it all starts there. That's really job one for fire resiliency, is home hardening.
Right. And that was the question about wood homes too. We had one other question, which I think that you sort of generally answered, and I know that this comes up a lot. People are like, you're talking about planting a landscape with native plants, but yet our hillsides are full of native plants, and that's what burns in our wildfires. So you're talking about native plants and hydration, and you're talking about hydrated native plants in our urban gardens. I just want to point out, and you will probably say this better than I, but the reason that we have the wildfires in January was because we didn't have any rains in November and December, which we normally would have. That usually our fire season ends when it rains, because those native plants are then hydrated, and then they don't burn as quickly or as easily as they do at the end of a long dry season. So, Greg,
that is a great question. I'm glad they brought it up. Okay, because it's really something that needs to be understood. That landscape, that chaparral landscape behind me, has been thinned and pruned up and mulched. Even though it doesn't have direct irrigation on it, when you thin out the vegetation and maybe just remove a few selective plants to get to that 50 to 60% canopy coverage, and you manicure stuff just like it's a landscape, what happens is the hydration of the individual plants naturally increases because there's much less transpiration. You have lower leaf volume. So you have a lot less massy twigginess, okay, to transpire a lot of moisture. So there's less draw on the stored resources that are actually stored in the mycorrhizal ecology, the sponge in the soil. So just the product of thinning was very effective in our research. at slowing the rate of fire spread significantly. The other thing that's a problem with these natural lands is they're completely trashed. And even around where that fire started above Palisades, there'd been a fire a few weeks before that didn't go completely out. That was all flashy grass and weeds between that and the community. Usually that often results from clearing, okay? That stuff goes up instantaneously, acres at a time. That's where fire engines get burned up, firemen get killed, people get killed. And that's the difference. What's behind me is actually much more representative of what the native natural ecology looked like before Europeans showed up.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to get back to the presentation now?
I'm going. Let's hit it.
All right.
All right. So love MP rotators, guys. They're like manna from heaven. I tested some of the first prototypes in the 90s. I couldn't believe my eyes. There's a lot of knockoffs, nowhere near as good as these guys are. And no, I do not work for Hunter, and I do not get paid for them. We're even experimenting with doing light hydration on naturally occurring native plants, as in the case on this perimeter that is natural coastal sage scrub. The plants are getting moisture about once every 10 to 14 days in summer. They are clearly hydrated, but they're not unhealthy. They're not overgrown, but they're going to do much better in a fire situation than the completely dormant stuff beyond. Plus, it looks nicer, you know? So that's working out too. And it's kind of anathema to a lot of restoration ecologists, but I'm telling you, it works. We don't really worry about it, honestly. Anyway. All right, so this is what it looks like, guys. All right, it isn't this wall of fire, it's a wall of embers. All right, it's like the fire falls Yosemite going sideways. The problem was that these approaches, even the ones we're debating now, are really destructive to the environment, and the outcomes are completely inconsistent. So the U.S. Navy, why the U.S. Navy? Well, yeah, they're out in the middle of the ocean, but they also administer tens of thousands of acres of naval housing on reserves right up against the wildland-urban interface. So they came and saw my presentation. They said, well, let's put some science to this. And they awarded us a research grant, and I was co-principal investigator with the leading fire ecologist in California, if not the world, Dr. John Keeley. And this is how we designed it. Our subject homes had to be located along the wildland-urban interface. You'll hear that term WUI. Have to survive the major fire event and also include a lightly irrigated native landscape, thinned natural vegetation according to common prescriptions, generally around 50%, and also contain unmodified shrubland vegetation, which was our control. And this is the results, okay? And John said when they ran all these results, and they did it through a supercomputer modeling program because people are a little loath to have you lighting fires on their property. But it's a very, very sophisticated fire modeling software. And we saw these relationships consistently in a matter of vegetation, all kinds of vegetation types, and also in different situations. And that is the dotted line. This is rate of fire spread, meters per minute on the vertical axis. And here were the buckwheat specimens. The dotted line were the irrigated, the dashed lines were the thin, and the solid line were the unmodified control. And for buckwheat, this relationship, this pancake, was always held even as a function of wind speed and slope percent. And then we also did the same thing looking at overall chaparral. And again, the irrigated had the lowest rate of fire spread, followed by the thin. And the thin was pretty decent. And then you had your controls above that. And that was a function of slope, and this was a function of wind speed, okay? So clearly the results showed that a planted native lightly irrigated landscape has the least rate of fire spread, and that thinning is also very effective for slowing the rate of fire spread compared to the natural controls. And this is real science. This was 4 years, tens of thousands of data points, and all processed. So people are asking about the mulch, right? Well, yeah, generally I don't put it in zone 0 anymore, but boy, is it great for the rest of your native planting. Shredded redwood bark is absolutely the closest approximation to the natural duff layer that forms in chaparral plant communities. It's also beautiful. It lasts 5 to 10 years. And the key factor that people are missing, and that the IBHS missed in their tests, and they didn't even test redwood, they tested cedar, was that they just had fluffed up mulch and they lit on fire. Well, heck, you can burn steel wool. We used to do it as kids. It burns really great. The key is it has to be well consolidated by overhead watering. It's critical to fire resistant. It's much less oxygenated. Also, when it comes to oak trees, people ask me, do we leave the oak leaf litter? I say yes. You can thin it a little bit, but you want to maintain at least 4 inches, okay? That's because a healthy, hydrated, weed-free live oak has got to be much, much more fire resilient than one where you've raked out all the leaves, the weeds have come in and taken over, the plant is half dead because of the weeds, and now all the insects and that, they're attacking it. So much better to leave the natural duff layer in place. And by the way, here's how the mulch looked on the same slope just 14 months later. The 1 gallon plants are now 3 to 5 feet across. The mulch is consolidated down to about 1 inch. It's adhered to the soil and it's very poorly oxygenated, and there's no weeds, okay? Now I do want to, before I get into the case histories, I do want to say that a couple of our homes did sustain some damage, both in the same fire complex. So this was out between Ramona and Santa Isabel. The house survived, but ironically, in this corner, back corner here, we didn't do any landscaping. It was actually wide open, right? It was flagstone. And unfortunately, there wasn't a tree to block anything. So the embers came in and it caught this part of the shade structure, and then it burned a little bit on the interior and really smoke damaged the kitchen area. So that all had to be replaced, okay? But the main part of the home, the rest of the home, was just fine. And this was one of our clients in the Witch Creek Fire in Poway. And the interesting thing about this, so there was just some damage to the window here and a little bit to the eaves, okay? But what caught this fire was junipers growing right around the base of the plant that hadn't been irrigated. They were dry junipers. Those things are pretty bad in an unirrigated situation. They're really bad actors, and they're really hard to get, hydrated, right? But the natives out here, well, this manzanita might look dead, but it's just scorched, and it came back, and you can even see, and we see this a lot. This was actually a ground cover, a small chamise, a greasewood, and notice that half of it is still green, okay? This other stuff was not native, and unfortunately, it kind of burned. But the natives were quite resilient. And look at, and even the hedge over here, you can just see it's scorched. It's perfectly fine. It's just scorched. But yeah, this one did get a little bit of damage in that fire too. It didn't destroy the home at all. And but then here's a cedar fire example. This is in Ramona. One of the things I want you to know, so here's that redwood mulch. This is how it sort of smoldered away. But notice that not all of it burned. Notice these red plastic marker flags. These are very important because here's your whole thing in a nutshell, guys. All right. This is a planted area. This was recently planted a couple of weeks before the cedar fire came through. In order to mark those as new plants that needed extra water, we put plastic marker flags. okay? And because we weren't savvy about things, and probably because it didn't make that much difference anyway, we mulched this whole area, but it was well consolidated redwood mulch. First, exhibit 1. These plastic marker flags aren't even melted. The only reason this one's melted is not because of the mulch, it's because of the burning garden hose right there. Number 2, if you look at the screed line on the house, you can actually see the real scorch marks of shredded redwood bark in a consolidated condition in zone 0, okay? Those are areas that aren't even burned. And then exhibit 4 is this plastic drain grate sticking out of the mulch. It too is completely intact and unmelted, all right? So while I wouldn't necessarily set up the situation today, this ended up being the perfect research example microcosm for what really happens in fires. And here's the back of the house. Again, notice all the unburned, unmelted plastic marker flag, large portions of the mulch that were unburned. Lots of hardscape back here, which I do recommend, flagstone, little cutouts for plantings that are completely unburned, all right? Maybe my mistake was to do some plantings next to the house with mulch. The plants are all fine, they all recovered, okay? And the mulch was in that consolidated condition. The interesting thing from my fire hardening standpoint is that this house did almost burn down. It had nothing to do with the landscape. Fortunately, she had, double pane steel frame windows. The tile roofs are all plugged at the end. That is extremely important so you don't get rats or bird nests going on up there and lighting the subroofing. All their vents the fireplaces had arresters and all the vents were screened over. Everything was right. But about a week before the fire, the wife got into a huge fight with the husband because there was literally a cord of firewood stored at this back corner where that wagon is. She won, thank God, and got him to move it away from the house. He put it over next to the propane tank. And then over here was wicker furniture. And I don't know if I have a picture. No, I don't. But that wicker furniture burned with an 8-foot flame height. Thank God this person actually resisted the evacuation order, saw the flames, got the CAL FIRE people to come around and put out the flames. Interestingly, they busted down the door, ripped out all the drywall on the other side here so it wouldn't conduct the flames, and the house was saved. The fire never moved into the house. But had that not been seen, that wicker furniture sitting in zone 0, in other words, flammable material, and this cord of firewood sitting in zone 0 could have done in the house. Meanwhile, the landscape is a little smoldered and virtually intact. This is in rangeland development in Ramona. Again, this is one really great hydratable plant, the native grapes. They hang on their moisture beautifully. Also notice that the overhead structure is masonry and steel, but the only thing that's really incinerated is this Ficus benjamina in the pot right here. It was dead. But this was a very fire resilient shade structure with a very fire resilient plant. And I usually don't single out plants, but this one is especially good. So is bladderpod too. I find that bladderpod hydrates really nicely and resists flames. And this right here is an example of relative hydration, because remember, we're all about hydration. This is a back slope. It was covered in ground cover rosemary and also a few buckwheats that blew in or were planted by birds. It was only getting watered about once every 14 days in summer, which is sort of the max interval I like to go on these fire resilient plants. Well, unfortunately, the rosemary is a black smudge, but the buckwheat is still covered in green leaves, okay? This shows you, and it's empirical, but it kind of shows you that the Mediterranean drought tolerance need about twice the water or half the interval of watering that the established native plants require to maintain decent LFMC, live fuel moisture content. Okay, so there it is again, another one of those microcosm serendipitous things that you can compare something as being same soil, same location, being watered at the same time. Rosemary, buckwheat. Buckwheats actually do really well in fire. I'm sorry, it's shocking. Like here's some buckwheats in Artemisia. They were being watered, okay? And again, did not develop enough flame height to scorch the white stucco back here, okay? The house didn't burn, the east didn't burn, nothing, okay? This is another area of rangeland, Witch Creek fire. And I showed you this already with the concrete apron that, maybe that did help save this home. It was a hot fire. This is a real good example. Another home in rangeland in Ramona. Witch Creek fire came in. It scorched the live oaks. They're all perfectly fine. But then it jumped across this big, clear llama pen. Okay. And we see over and over again that clearing vegetation only speeds up the flow. It's laminar flow. It doesn't block or catch. But then, fortunately, it hit this hydrated slope with Baccharis and coffee-berry and toyon, okay, ceanothus. And that caught the embers and cooled them off. And it didn't develop enough radiant heat to even burn this large wooden deck at the back of the house. I did not install that deck, by the way. I wouldn't really recommend it in a fire zone, especially northeast facing, but there you go. And all these plants are just scorched. If you seriously doubt, oh, by the way, there's the irrigation right there. There's a Hunter rotary. Here's the same landscape 3 years later. This could stand as the before picture too, okay? Beautiful green belt right around zone 1, 2 here. And again, where they did the clearing, it just jumped across that like nothing, If we'd had more oaks than that, well, maybe it wouldn't even gotten this far. And here I told you, we even had a couple of landscapes where this major fire, this was the Harris fire in Harbison Canyon, and that's Lawson Peak in the background, actually bifurcated, went around the lightly hydrated native landscape. Notice it didn't even catch the mulch, rejoined up, and went straight up Lawson Peak and burned down the fire tower up there in a very famous video. It shows that. I mean, it doesn't get any starker than this, right? So you got 6 to 10 feet of lightly hydrated native vegetation, unmodified, unirrigated natural chaparral. And he was pretty pleased that his $100,000 solar array didn't burn up either, okay? So, I mean, it doesn't get any either or than this. It is just juxtaposition. You couldn't ask for a scientific experience. This is what IBHS is lacking. They are not lacking real world fire behavior in the real world, not throwing pine needles at a house in South Carolina. Okay, yet they're driving all the decisions being made coming out of Northern California, which doesn't have as extensive experience. And this is what we're getting. Okay, I had to put this in for laughs. This happened a couple months ago. So this is our latest example of fire in the native landscape. This lady was, trying to avoid the use of Roundup, so she was using a weed torch and accidentally or otherwise caught the mulch on fire. Except she noticed that it didn't develop any flame height and it went out. And so she went in the house, and a few hours later, she heard sirens. And what had happened was that mulch, just as we know, it just smoldered. It did a little bit of scorching on the plants. They're perfectly fine. And if you look at a picture now you wouldn't even know there's a fire there. But it kind of creeped its way up over hours. And it hit this macadamia and burned the leaves that were around it. So it got a little more scorched. The sage is fine. And then it went over and then it hit the avocado. Those avocado leaves are some of the worst ember-forming firebrands you could ever imagine. And they aren't designed to hold on to water in the face of flames. And it burned. And that's when people got the attention. And that's when they called the fire department. They came and put it out. Notice the sunset manzanita here. It is not dead. It did not burn. It's just heat damage. It's just scorched. And already it's completely recovered. All right. Even the avocado is coming back. You know, I thought it was a goner, but it's coming back. So what's the object lesson here? I'd asked Christy, I said, okay, you said the fire went out, but Christy, it really didn't go out, did it? Oh no, the flames disappeared and everything. I said, but Christy, it wasn't fully out. It was smoldering. Don't ever, if you're working with any flammable materials, leave a fire alone that you haven't put out with a hose or a shovel. Actually, this stuff is very easy to put out because all you do is get a rake and you just rake the unburned stuff towards the black. That stops the fire front. But anyway, yeah, that shows you some fire resilience in action. You can't even tell fire. All these plants have completely grown back in 2 months. And it was lightly hydrated. Okay. So anyway, natives are just the bomb when it comes to fires, I'll tell you. And even the rosemary did okay too. Okay, guys, here's your clearance in action, right? This guy cleared 300 feet around his house. You can see that it's just dirt. Nothing was there to burn, right? Well, nothing was there to slow or deflect the embers either. And the house is just a pile of ash with a chimney. And ironically, some green queen palms all around it. These little skinny toothpicks don't do anything. This was incredibly beautiful, supple, vital, natural chaparral habitat. It was absolute environmental devastation to just peel it off the way they did, and look what it got them, you know. Yeah, these guys too, same thing, right? Cleared all this stuff, all right, and didn't help them at all. The lawns are still green, right? But you have singed palms. The palms will actually come back just to add insult to injury. But the fronds detach too, and you know, it's just we just got to change our paradigm there. Lightly irrigated native shrubs and trees in this thing would have gone a long way towards arresting embers. And I just, after all this depressing stuff, guys, I just wanted to show you what a nice native landscape in La Jolla looks like, right? I mean, just to show you how beautiful these things are. This thing's won a few awards. It's been on lots of garden tours. Homeowners just love it, you know, and it's just, it is fire resilient in the same breath. And yeah, and here it is overlooking the ocean there, the Bee's Bliss Sage, a beautiful photograph. Now I'm going to finish this thing up with just some post-fire things to do. For those people that are kind of living along the wildland urban face, you might have a situation where you have gullies. And, you know, the last thing you want to do is come in and plant grass or even ryegrass, which is the worst. Ryegrass single-handedly knocks out native ecology. And then it's ready to burn again. No, what you want to do is you simply want to address these drainages by putting T-posts across it and then taking the burned branches and just weave them in between. All you're trying to do is actually stop the debris from coming down, slow the water a little bit, but it can actually come through so you don't have all this weight building up. And you do this every maybe 20 to 40 feet, depending on like how steep the gully is. And that's it. If you got to put a few sandbags around the back of the house to deflect the water a little bit, fine. And if this had native habitat like this was, it'll come back in the most beautiful wildflower display you could ever imagine. If you planted, ryegrass or gazanias, destroy that native ecology. No wildflowers ever again, gone. And here, this is an example of aerial seeding. You can see the stripes of ryegrass they put down. This is 1986 in Quest to Grade. To this day, these bands have never been recolonized by the madrone chaparral, the beautiful madrone chaparral. And, this stuff's ready to burn every August. It's just, we're doing completely wrong things. And, it's funny because after our Witch Creek fire, this is in Escondido del Dios around Lake Hodges. This is the show we got. Okay, right here in our own backyard. Everybody's running off to the Anza Borrego Desert to see wildflowers. Heck, all they had to do was drive 5 miles and get out of their car. And it was crazy. I mean, it was beautiful. It was like that Wizard of Oz scene, okay? And here's an example of a place that was seeded, all right? Nasty, non-native grasses, thistles like star thistle. This oak is under siege. It'll be gone before long. And this is how it should look after a fire. Clean. Sometimes you'd be crunching on glass that forms from the melted silica. That's okay. It's no problem. This is a clean ecology. This is how it should look. Here it is 1 year later with all the wildflowers and plants coming back in. And here it is 5 years later. It's this beautiful, natural garden. And here's my contact info if you guys are interested, and I'm ready to take any questions you might still have. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have one from Kat. She said they said that they're really encouraged to see all of this. They just heard from their local fire office that their do not plant list includes a lot of buckwheats and other species that you've included here. And they're funding hazardous vegetation removal, so hello brush clearance, including a good number of native species. So would you like to respond to that? Do you have any advice?
Yeah, well, it's sad. So plant lists are irrelevant, guys. Unfortunately, we got to deal with what we got to deal with here. It's all about hydration. Buckwheats hydrate beautifully. Green leaves, even in the face of flames, okay? And because I've seen it in a natural, unhydrated summer condition, when all the oils build up to displace the moisture so that they can ride through the dry season, okay, yeah, they burn. Yeah, they have small leaves. But man, you just do this little bit of supplemental irrigation, they're like completely different animals, okay? So fire, I don't know what to do, to be honest with you, because there's a couple things going on. There are communities that have these do not plant lists. They're ridiculous. Like I say, they're irrelevant. But if that's what we have to adhere to, unfortunately, that's what we have to adhere to. But when you remove the buckwheats, don't tear them out. Just cut them back. Maybe just a nub, okay? They will come back. And if it's an area that you're planting or doing restoration, if you put that little bit of supplemental irrigation, they'll be green. And they'll be hard pressed to even notice that they're still there. Okay. I don't know if we have any fire inspectors in there. I apologize. Okay. And I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble here. Okay. Do what you believe needs to be done. And my recommendation is to always follow their rules, even if we don't agree with them.
But
when they're in a hydrated condition, they really aren't dangerous, and they're the pillars of their communities. Incredible habitat. There are other plants that usually are on the safe list. Baccharis pigeon point is a good one. That's a good ecological plant too. some of the ceanothus and manzanitas. Hopefully they're at least that informed. Evergreen plants hold moisture well. Had houses saved by stands of manzanita. Um, Oaks, certainly sycamores, coffee berry, lemonade berry, toyon, all that stuff. They do really well. I hope they're not on your list. Generally, what you'll see is buckwheats, artemisia, and sage. Okay. And again, you just saw a photo where the sage, the the mulch was lightly smoldering underneath it. It didn't light up the sage. It stressed a few leaves. That was about it. But yeah, the conventional wisdom is all wrong. The paradigm is wrong. We need to refocus and look at actual research and real world experience. And that's what's missing from a lot of the dialogue here. And I'm doing my best to try to do what I can.
Thank you, Greg. And hopefully we can everyone here can take this information to heart and move forward as we all move back into our communities and work with our local fire departments, and with Greg, with the UCLA work that you're doing with that coalition. Hopefully we'll start to see some change from CAL FIRE and our local agencies. We do have a bunch of other plant related questions if you have a minute.
Absolutely.
Talk about that.
I
Okay.
think we're good on time, actually. I think
Yeah, we are
we're
actually, we're very speedy with this, so thank you. Someone asked about using junipers as ground covers, particularly in zone 0, I believe.
well, yeah. So I've had bad experiences with juniper, but typically these weren't hydrated to the level they needed to be. And one of the problems with junipers and Italian cypress is all the dead stuff on the inside. Okay. Sometimes it helps to hit it with a power washer and kind of try to knock out some of those dead leaves and collected detritus in the inside, because that really is a major source of, fire carrier. And with junipers, what I like to do is if they're like the Chinese junipers, the 3 foot tall ones, whatever, I like to open them up and kind of give them sort of a bonsai Japanese kind of a look to them, give them some structure. I remove 70% of the fuel volume by taking down 50% of the scaffolding, right? That's one thing. Your fire inspector is probably going to have heartburn once they institute this legislation. They see, junipers growing into your 5 foot zone. If they're growing entirely within it, you probably have to remove it. It was funny. One of the debates yesterday during the hearing was people would say, "Well, I have a beautiful, mature Japanese maple that unfortunately it's coming out of my zone 0. Do I have to remove it?" And most of the people, yes, you got to remove it. Well, in fact, she probably does. You know why? Try hydrating a Japanese maple. People are complaining, "Oh, I've seen hydrated willows burn." I said, same thing. These are not drought tolerant plants. They don't hold on to the moisture. They need tons of moisture, and that's a different class of plant. The stuff we're recommending is the stuff behind me, and actually is bred and trained to hold on to its moisture.
Great. So another question is, we had a couple of different questions about hedges, and you talked earlier about layering trees and shrubs of different heights to create the gullies and valleys and sort of really break up the airflow. And
Yes.
this is a question that, to elaborate on that a little bit more also. So you're talking about in the, not the zone 0 or zone 1, but in the further zones, keeping the plants separated a little bit and having them be open. So
Yeah.
I am a little bit confused myself, because it seems like on the one hand, we want to have these sort of solid walls of water that are the leaves and the plants that aren't too dense, but they're dense enough that they either divert the air, or if the embers go through them, that they get caught in the leaves and they get put out. And that you want different. So I'll let you answer it after that. But
yeah, well, that's a great question. That's a fantastic question. Let me try to characterize it from an aerodynamic perspective. Okay. I'm gonna try not to lose you guys. You clear all the way around, like that poor home in Ramona that cleared 300 feet, and there's nothing left, okay, except a chimney. And what that creates is a very smooth surface for this ember-laden wind to go over. And there's nothing to disturb it, nothing to perturb it. It's absolutely like a wind tunnel. It's smooth as can be. And in fact, in those situations, we call it laminar flow, where layers of air come through and there's no turn, nothing playing with it. Even can speed up over these surfaces, okay? Just like going over a wing, and that airflow speeds up, okay? So that is creating the most unbelievable blast furnace that we're now asking a house to withstand, okay? So around the house, right around within that zone 1, let's say, I gave you an example. That was that house in La Jolla with the carex lawn, the sedge lawn, and you saw the watered plantings and everything. It's a beautiful landscape. There are plants that can take a little extra moisture, water it once every 7 to 9 days, and it's happy as can be during the summer. On the periphery of that, now in La Jolla, you can't get beyond zone 1. You're hardly into zone 1, right? In Altadena, in Palisades, you're barely into zone 1, let alone zone 2. So for that to be effective, to create effective defensible space, you need a green belt that consists of different size classes. We've talked about it. And what we're trying to do, the problem is if it's like a monolithic hedge of vegetation, that laminar flow, that coming down the mountain, going to hit that solid block of vegetation, and it's going to go right up at least 3 times the height over and drop down. Okay. There was a recent fire in Laguna, and you saw that in action, that they had cleared for 100 feet downslope. It was a weird fire because it was coming from onshore winds from a power plant, and the fire went right on up. It hit that cleared zone, and nothing was stopping at that point. But what happened is the aerodynamics took it up, and it was the second and third rows of houses that were burning. You could see it. It's a video. There's some video out there still. So you don't want to create a solid hedge of vegetation. You want that air mass to be able to go in between stuff, but then blocked later down slope by a tree or a shrub. So this is overlapping coverage that you're providing perpendicular to the slope, but in fact, you're not creating monolithic stands of vegetation, which would just perturb the whole air mass. Okay. Now, when you revisit, going back to zone 1, that what's becoming apparent is that these hedges that are basically zone 0 right next to the house, in addition to larger trees set back, are saving homes. Okay. So there is a bit of a contradiction there, I think. But looking at it from a air mass perspective rather than a fuel perspective, it makes more sense.
So Greg, developing on that then, if you have a neighborhood that you're planning or working with like a whole city, if you have a series of streets with these tall street trees that are planted in dense rows, is it possible that the embers would go up and up and they would come down and then they would go up again and until they finally go out?
It's possible. What you're really trying to do is create a defensible perimeter. I'm not saying that this green belt would have stopped the Palisades fire. Okay, that was a monster, right? And it was flashy fuels, and it was embers, and it was just
and very fast winds, like strong.
But they had nothing on the outskirts of that community for the most part to even slow it down, perturb it, catch it, whatever. And so where you would typically think to put your ice plant slopes, right, around the HOA and that, do what's behind me, okay? And it's freaking beautiful, by the way, and full of birds and butterflies and low water, low maintenance. But some of these communities will have intermittent slopes in there too. And you want to also do the same kind of beautiful treatment on those slopes as well, because you want to create weird obstacles. You want to really screw this smooth flow of air up. And primarily what you're trying to do is just slow it down to allow fire crews to get in there and set up a real perimeter without dying, and fight the fire back from those positions before. Because once the fire's into the community, you're off to the races, man. It's going house to house to house. And sometimes those hedges actually save some of the houses, like I showed you in that picture.
Right.
And so, yeah, but in general, I am doing a permanently irrigated, standard sort of shrubland ground cover, native landscape. And then towards the pier, I starting to build in trees and stuff that are overlapping in that. But again, in Palisades, you don't even get out that far. You got to have in the surrounding areas, the surrounding slopes.
Right. And it's also really important to remove those flashy fuels and the weeds and the mustards and the grasses.
That is huge. That's the number one, because they also affect the health of the plants. So now you've got a manzanita surrounded by dry grass. That's a fire ladder that is also robbing moisture and sugars from the system without returning it back to the mycorrhizal grid, hence making the plant itself dehydrated and unhealthy and half dead. So then you've got the perfect situation for a disaster.
Right, absolutely. So I think that hopefully everyone that asked those questions about shrubs and hedges got what they needed from that. Nan actually asked, so when you were showing one of the graphs, I think from Dr. Keeley, she said that it looked to her like there was very little difference between the the irrigated, thinned, and control areas. And I think that's, do you want to address that?
I don't understand the question.
Well, I think that just that she couldn't see a big differential in the grid between the different areas. And I think you were trying to show, I don't know if you want to go back to that slide or not.
Are we talking about the paradise photo?
No, I think it was
Yeah, from John's report.
Yeah, from John's report.
Let me do this. Okay.
And while you're looking for that, there were some questions also about drip irrigation. So Charles unfortunately had to leave, but he's doing a lot of like lawn removals and turf replacements. And so the water agencies are demanding using drip for that. And then someone else asked if it could be like a 12 to 18-inch grid for the drip. If we can work with those for fire.
So, we still do drip in like isolated narrow planters.
Right.
Okay. It's the only practical way to water these things. What you get with overhead is you get total coverage from above, which comes through the leaves, through the mulch. That's so critical, because coming through the mulch pulls out the most micro of micronutrients that are being delivered to the mycorrhizal fungi at a very measured rate, and it's also consolidating the mulch. That's incredibly important. And as it gets established, the mulch then becomes more of a vapor barrier, because I get people call and say, well, gosh, I watered my MPs and it's hardly wet beneath the mulch. And I say, exactly. So it's worked for us for 800 landscapes, and I'm not, and I should say this, I am not, this is not a universally held position, okay? There are people that have very passionate positions about drip. In San Diego, the water agencies will allow either drip or efficient overhead, i.e. MP rotators. And, we have beautiful landscapes as a result, and they're very efficient on water, and they seem to like emulating the natural ecology. Okay. But yes, they're very passionate supporters of drip. The drips can be very, efficient. But there are some downsides to it too that we prefer to avoid. And we've got 15, 20-year-old MP systems out there. They're doing just fine to this day without any animal damage or leaks and stuff like that. So I think maybe Nan's talking about this comparison here, or this actual, what's going on here. Is that it? Is that the question, Nan?
I think it was the chart. It was
I
Oh, the
can ask
chart.
Nick to unmute if you want.
Yeah, and Nan.
no,
I
not,
have to
not
do it on my phone, on my
Oh,
computer.
okay.
I think it
Well, I
was
want to answer Nan's question, so.
okay. So we have, I was going to answer this, but maybe you can answer this while we're waiting. So Sophie asks, so when he says the plants stop the flow, is that only in a wind-driven fire?
Well, yes, that's what all this is intended to address. Because in general, your fuel-driven fires move at a relatively slow rate at which they can get containment, right? Set up a perimeter and contain the fire. And that's been happening all over San Diego this year, this summer. And they're containing them. Some are big. There's, I think, one about 1,600 acres or something. But as you see in here in the field dominated fires, there's no lives lost, relatively few structures. The rim fire was horrible. Interesting that they're all natural or campfire started. But they were able to contain them without loss of life with very little structural damage.
Greg,
And then the
can
wind
you hear me?
dominated fires, it's a different story.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Okay.
hear you, Nan. Hi.
You showed the data from the study that John Keeley, that you worked with on you worked on with John Keeley, and it had
Mhm.
several graphs that compared irrigated, thinned, and controlled vegetation. There was like a series of four XY charts. Excuse me. Right there. Yeah. And when I look at this, I don't see very much difference between the thin, the irrigated, and the control.
Yeah, so you're looking here, it's a fairly condensed Y scale here. But it is definitely a difference. Actually, John said the results were more definitive than he ever expected. And you're 10 to 12 right here versus about 15 to 16 meters per minute. So they are significant, especially as slope and wind speed increase. Okay. The chaparral sites were closer together for sure, but there is definitely a consistent difference. And it may not be, a case where we go from, 10 meters per minute to 40, right? But it is definitely a difference and can spell the difference between being able to create defensible space to catch embers, slow things down, and not doing anything at all, and just having unmodified natural vegetation.
So the solid line is the control, is that right?
Yeah. And it's interesting. There are other I didn't put up all the graphs, but in reality, actually, some of the different individual species showed a little more difference, a little more separation. We took Eriogonum because that one is considered one of the most flammable on everybody's no plant list, and showed that there is a significant difference. And we're seeing it in practice, right? Over and over again. And we've been in 25 fire events and we haven't lost a home. And what's interesting, maybe I should put up one of these days, is laurel sumac. Laurel sumac is another one, Nan, that they just vilify. And that one actually benefited the most from the supplemental irrigation. And, you get into live fuel moisture percentages in that. And that also really shows, I don't have those graphs here, but you're looking at, I'm not exactly sure what's considered a real fire resilient level LFMC. I think it's probably between 80 and 100%. And Laurel sumac is going up to 150%, right? And unmodified, it can get down to 40%, and so, it all had benefits. It was a synergistic effect. But this one here, I show this because there is a real difference. And, 10 meters per minute versus, 15, 18, that can really spell a difference in making it more defensible. Plus, in slowing down and catching embers, which we didn't really look at, but from our empirical data, over and over again, we're seeing these cases where these hydrated natives are not burning, they're scorching, they're catching embers, and then, and then even the stuff that Luca and Max did that they published in LA Times, they're showing instances where and also Doug Kent wrote an article about showing how these hydrated trees were stopping embers and saving homes. I mean, it's just, we've seen it for 30 years, It's getting more quantified now though, but yeah, it may not seem like much, but it really does make a difference, especially when you combine it with the synergism of all the other positive benefits.
And Greg, I think you might have had a slide where you combined irrigated and thinned, because this is just showing one or the other, correct?
This is it. So dotted line is irrigated, dashed line is thin, solid line is unmodified.
Oh, but it's not, was there one, so this is either thinned or irrigated, not both?
No, it's
That's
both
right.
against each other.
Oh, okay.
So each of these sites had examples of thin natural chaparral, irrigated native plantings, and then unmodified plant community.
Okay. But you weren't combining irrigating and thinning on as a fourth test plot.
No, and actually that's a good question
I
because
think you had that somewhere else, right? I've seen that data too. I thought that was even more effective.
I don't have it as we haven't researched it yet and put numbers to it. I had a photograph of that in action where we'd taken some coastal sage scrub and
Right.
irrigated
Okay.
the perimeter to demonstrate that the plants are not overgrown, not unhealthy, but definitely hydrated and green. And interestingly, I've got there's a native designer down here named Dennis Mudd, whose property in Poway is right up against the wildlands, right? And his portion, he's actually doing a very interesting way of irrigating, which is using basically indirect drip, kind of flooding areas, and then the mycorrhiza is pulling it in. He said there's a definite difference, even though these aren't being overhead watered or drip watered or directly watered, having these little riparian zones kind of winding through the plantings, those plants are clearly much better hydrated and green than the surrounding chaparral adjacent to his property.
Oh,
It'd be interesting to run these kind of tests on his vegetation to see where it's at, but my guess would be that it's fairly fire resistant. So,
right. We had a question about rainwater harvesting and whether you could use that water for that, but for this irrigation, but that might be a really easy and inexpensive way to use rainwater in the landscape, is that if you could just flood your swales and berms just your rain swales if you had like cistern water or rain barrel water.
yeah, and these landscapes look really cool. We're known for our dry streams and our rockwork and stuff, and these become moisture nuclei, right? And so it's a hybrid between sort of like overhead and drip, right? And so you could fill these things up potentially. And I don't know how far from the water source you can place the plant to be effective and stuff, but it's really intriguing to me. And that is a good way to use the rainwater, right? It's the cleanest water you'll ever catch, right? And you don't have to pressurize it to water it through an MP system, right?
Exactly.
So I'm curious, I'll be curious to see if Dennis has kind of done any analysis to see, you know, how much separation he can get with these swells and to maintain effective hydration, you know.
Yeah, thank you. We have a couple other questions about specific trees. A couple of people are asking about olive trees, and someone else is asking about red buds. So since you spoke about Japanese maples, I was wondering if you'd like to speak about those two species.
Yeah, so red buds naturally occur kind of on the upper step away from a riparian zone. So they're kind of getting that deep water. They're very water tolerant too, so they work just fine in conventional landscapes. And they are hydratable, and they also don't present a lot of biomass to burn. So I found them do really good in fire situations. And
Okay.
it might, you know, singe away the leaves, but then they'll resprout afterwards. What was the other one? Olive
Olive.
trees?
Yeah.
Olive trees are so, you know, I treat them like they're evergreen willows. They are more drought tolerant than willows, certainly, but they do like regular water in this kind of a situation. I mean, we've seen old olive orchards that have been feral and the plants are, you know, doing fine and stuff. But in general, in these kinds of landscapes, you want to give them watering, and I usually end up giving them a good bubbler soak, maybe 7 to 10 days during the summer, something like that, and they should do okay. They do have olive oil, a lot of oil, but you're trying to displace that with water as much as you can. So, and I think they've done pretty well in fires, from my recollection.
We have a comment that said that Ellen lost her home in the Eaton fire, but her olive tree survived. So that's why she
Yeah,
was.
so there you go.
So there you go.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, actually. And I've seen it too, like in some of the fires, you know, came through Rancho Santa Fe. Some of those, they were singed but not killed.
I hope that I've covered anyone's questions. If I missed a question, please feel free to ask it again, and then I will notice it at the bottom. But we've had a lot of thank yous. People are really appreciative of this, Greg. You're doing a great job.
Oh, cool. I appreciate that Nan came and listened too. So love getting her perspective.
Absolutely. Let's see. Oh, someone else was asking about putting houses close together and not having space between them then for green, for
Yeah,
planting.
let me go back to that picture that was in Luca's article. Yeah. So you had this situation, right? And honestly, this part of the hedge is certainly in zone 0, you know, and I think there's a fence line running through it too. And I'm not even sure, honestly, looking at this, if this hedge may actually be planted on this person's side, right? Which is unfortunate for them, I guess, because, you know, it's all scorched, a little burning going on this side here. Looks like it. Well, maybe the fence is gone right there. But the interesting thing is that on the leeward side, it's still green and you have an intact house. You know, the fire was coming from this direction here. This place is incinerated, unfortunately. And what they saw over and over again, and this is several different people have been researching, I think John Keeley's actually been out there too, was that a lot of times the scorching that they're seeing right here was actually coming from the house. So it was the burning house that was actually affecting the vegetation rather than the vegetation burning and burning the house. And it just became apparent that it wasn't these landscapes that were burning down houses. Okay. It was this massive, solid, violent ember attack, you know, and then you also had the fan palms detaching and embers spitting off from the crown and petioles on the trunks burning up, you know, and just flowing with the wind. I mean, that's what got a good portion of Rancho Bernardo in the Witch Creek fire, the damn fan palms. You know, one of my client was the last house left standing, surrounded by natives, but all the other houses burned. And she said, as she evacuated the house, they're just burning fan palms everywhere, burning cars, burning houses, trying to get under her garage door. It was crazy.
So we had on that note, so someone else was asking about the deodars, the citrus or the deodar cedars. The Christmas tree lane in Altadena didn't burn. And also Italian cypress, you talked about that briefly. I was at a project yesterday and they have a solid hedge of Italian cypress planted like a foot apart, which is crazy. But is that even viable? You talked about maybe power washing it to get all the duff out from in the
Yeah,
middle?
because I think the dead debris becomes a big problem with those on the inside. And the same thing with dense like cypress too, you know, like arborvitae type things too. It collects all the dead leaves and everything on the inside, doesn't get shed. And but also think that, you know, there are few evergreen plants, let's put it that way, that can't be given some level of irrigation to achieve an effective LFMC.
Okay.
We've just had such great luck with the natives and it being a highly efficient and beautiful way to do it because it's the least amount of water to get that and it's the least amount of maintenance for it. And, you know, you get habitat and everything else, all those great virtues. And so, yeah, Italian cypress is a mixed bag. I've seen some burn, I've seen some last. Deodars are interesting. I've heard this too. I heard about that story about the deodars not burning, right? And it goes against everything they theorize. And that's what I'm saying. There's no friggin' real world experience out here, guys.
Well,
I
those
know
trees are
firemen do
growing
have
in
that, but they
open.
don't have the horticultural background. So, you
Right.
know, anyway.
That is the thing. We are asking our fire departments to make decisions about our landscapes. I like to compare
Exactly.
asking our
And
police
God
officers.
bless them. And they're trying to get out ahead of the legislation. And so they're kind of interpreting it without a lot of guidance, the way they're, you know, kind of understanding it. But
Right.
God bless firefighters, man. Oh my God. So anyway, but a lot of the guys you talk to, the actual firefighters, they'll confirm some of this stuff, you know, about, you know, lightning strikes in the forest and often the fires just going out before they can even get to the site, you know, and
Right.
but I think we just need to bring everybody from everywhere and converge and do something that, you know, preserves our natural beauty and doesn't turn plants into the boogeymen and blaming the plants when it's
Right.
mostly home hardening and it's ember control that are kind of the primary suspects or important factors, and to create kind of a win-win-win, you know, out of this, you know.
Exactly. So I like to say plants are not the problem. So anyway, but we do have one other question. I'm surprised this hasn't come
Sure.
yet about a potentially problematic plant, and that would be eucalyptus and eucalyptus hedge. And so they're asking if we can if you can power wash the eucalyptus hedge like you would the cedars or the cypress.
Well, you could. So here's the deal with eucalyptus. Kind of the dirty little secret in a lot of scripts in 2003. Those homes are shake roof and surrounded by eucalyptus. And you come on, you know, and I had customers out there that survived, and I went out there and toured, and you could smell the eucalyptus oil and the burned eucalyptus. But on closer inspection, it became kind of apparent. And this is 2003, so I hadn't really developed a lot of the experience and research that we've done since. But what I noticed was that a lot of the actual canopies of the eucalyptus were intact. Okay, were unburned. But it was the debris, the leaves, the bark that were sometimes 3-4 feet at the base of the eucalyptus that was burning and also acting as fire ladders into some of the smaller trees, and then creating embers in themselves, and then going to the shake roofs and going house to house to house. So the problem in my experience with the ukes is about site hygiene. It's just cleaning up all that debris. Yeah, I mean they can burn too, but I was profoundly affected or struck by the lack of actual burned canopy, burned trees. And it seemed to be happening at lower levels and smaller trees and saplings that were burning. So kind of interesting.
Well, they hold
And
a
they
lot.
also respond well to irrigation, to hydration.
Right. Right. Well, I think that is all of our questions. Again, lots of thanks, lots of gratitude expressed here. And thank you all again for being here. This is such an important conversation for all of us to participate in.
I hope people feel they got their money's worth. So.
Yes, thank you, Greg. It was a great webinar. I do know there are things left, but you know, we're already almost a half hour past when we promised people.
Oh,
So
sorry.
it's fine. No, it's great because these are all questions that need to be answered. And Greg finished before 6. So if people want to hang out and listen, they can. And they will choose to listen to the questions. Sorry if we didn't get to every single answer, but you know, Greg's information is available.
You know, honestly, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I have a few minutes here, so I'm okay. If you guys are okay with it, I'm willing to answer some more questions because I just don't like things hanging out there.
Julie, was there a question that you saw that I missed?
Yeah, let me go look.
There was
Well, there was a couple. Nan actually asked about the hydration, plant hydration. Let me find it. Sorry, and of course now my
Was that
dog.
when we talked about the graphs and
He
the
said, "How
relative?
can something be more than a hundred?" Hold on, I'll read it.
more than 100% hydrated.
Yeah.
For
Yeah,
the
how
Oh
can you
yeah,
have more
150,
than-
170% hydrated.
Yeah.
That's simply the weight of water to
Okay.
the weight of the biomass. You can store lots of water. Plastic bag full of water. Plastic bag weighs nothing, and you've got 5 pounds of water in there.
Okay, now let me see if there was anything else.
There was a comment I could read from an anonymous attendee. They said,
Yes, I was going to email that to you guys.
okay,
Okay.
I'll read that really briefly. It says quickly. Sorry, my dog has also decided she needs to be part of this. As an advocate for sustainable defensible space in Sonoma County, a local fire official shared the following perspective about Zone 0 legislation. The regulations are leaning on an engineered solution rather than a behavioral solution, and fire safety professionals will prefer an engineered solution every time. The behavioral solution relies on humans to do certain things like keeping the plants appropriately irrigated. This includes watering during droughts, while away from home, while in the hospital, and even when there are fines imposed for using too much water, etc. At the end of the day, the regulator's mind is given complexities in vegetation modeling. Having no plants there is safer than counting on humans to select the right plants and keeping them well irrigated and maintained year after year, homeowner after homeowner. So I understand that, but I think Greg, and hopefully you would agree with this, but I think that you can say that about anything. I mean, we have to maintain our cars,
Yeah.
we have to maintain our homes, we have to keep our roofs clean, we have to maintain our gutters. Like that is, unfortunately, life is messy and things fall apart. But just saying that we can't be trusted to irrigate our plants,
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like a reasonable argument to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
I
okay.
mean,
Look, you know, I actually don't disagree that much with his general idea here. And, you know, as far as plant selection and irrigation, well, that's why we're professionals in this business, right? This is what we do. But also there's a lot of information, a lot of resources out there if they try to do it themselves. The, how do I put this? The zone zero stuff is going to possibly help with debris, burning debris that might be collecting up against the house and blown against the house. Okay. But it's not the plants, as you've eloquently stated, that are burning these houses down. Okay. It wasn't this hedge and that tree in the front and this garden in the back that burned down this house, burned down the house next door. I mean, and what I'm nervous about is it tends to kind of take the onus off of the really effective stuff that needs to be done, like the home hardening. I mean, generally modern construction homes do pretty darn good in fire events. Okay, they weather them pretty well in general, you know, and we're really up on that. I mean, we really have advanced technology on that. The only other thing that I want to mention to you guys, and I just thought of it, there is an aspect to zone zero that can be helpful for firefighters, and that's access.
Yep.
Okay. And I don't know if I can just go out. I have a video to show you guys from Altadena. No, Halsey? No, I think it was from Altadena. But what it basically showed was firefighters in one person's yard that had access along the side of their yard, fighting the neighbor's fire over the fence. So they were able to set up there unimpeded and be able to put that water right on the flames, you know. And that was pretty dramatic. And that is something to think about too. And the other thing is, you know, when firefighters go ahead of the flames and they do these neighborhood canvassing, they make real life or death situations. It's like, you know, I can defend that home. I can safely defend it. I cannot defend that home because I don't want to lose my life necessarily protecting their possessions. Okay. So there is that whole aspect too. So there's a lot of, I realize I'm probably contradicting myself a little bit, but it almost like I want fire inspectors to actually have more of a role because they know if they're going to burn up and they can't get in there or, you know, if the amount of maintenance is correct and they have a defensible house, you know. So I really want the local fire inspectors to have more of a role and be educated in all these different approaches and techniques, and you know, rather than try to have Sacramento shove it down our throat because Sonoma ain't San Diego, you know, and
Exactly.
you know, it was funny when my book came out. People are going, well, you know, your book is intended for Southern California, but can you list plants that will do well in Northern California? How would you do that? And my response is kind of like as gently as I could be. Look, we get Santa Ana winds. We get 9 to 12 inches of rainfall a year. We have very inorganic soils, and we have a lot of heat and low humidity. And believe me, if you can do a successful native landscape down here, it's going to be kind of a piece of cake up there. And the other truth is that this book is not about growing San Diego plants universally. It's about adapting San Diego and Los Angeles gardens to be able to accommodate plants from Monterey Bay, Yankee Point, and Sonoma, and Point Sal, and you know, Pigeon Point. I mean, these very far northern plants that are getting 40 inches of equivalent rainfall and fog drip, cooler temperatures, higher humidity. But we get them to go down here, you know, because
Exactly.
that's what's available.
Exactly. Greg, okay, I think we need to wrap it up.
But there
someone
are a
just
couple.
posted-
Shall
the
we
fire.
just do two more
Oh,
questions? No? Yes?
so the vine on the pergola was the California grape.
Right.
Wow.
But
Vitis californica. And also I have a question for you, Greg. So you had
Yes.
so following up with this, keeping access for firefighters around the house, like that is also, I really think that is really important with the zone zero. So not only not putting the wood pile and the flammable furniture, wicker furniture next to the house, but
That's
keeping it
huge.
open and clear and not having like a
Yes.
piles of potted plants and debris and gardening tools and bikes and stuff so that they can't actually get their hoses up. I mean, we have to do that on the top of our roofs for our solar panels. Like I had to have 5 feet for my solar panels. They had to reinstall them because they installed them the wrong
Oh,
way.
wow.
And that's because the firefighters have to be able to walk across the edge of the roof to put out, for access. So
There you go.
it sort of seems like the same thing on the ground. But when the wife won the fight and the husband had to move his wood pile next to the propane tank, I'm wondering how that went in the fire.
Isn't that funny? I just threw that in there to see if anybody got that.
I heard that.
Yeah, actually it went fine. You know why? Because they have something called a wastegate. And so as they heat up and they overpressure, it just vents the gas out, which is, inflamed, right? But it's like this high pressure,
So the propane tank
high
didn't.
pressure venting of hot gas coming out.
So the propane tank was safe then.
Yeah,
And
survived.
the wood pile didn't light neither one of those two flammable things lit each other on fire.
Right, exactly. And I mean, the propane coming out was on fire, but it was very high pressure. So the flames would be probably a foot or 18 inches away from the nozzle. So, because it's such high pressure, it's like a flamethrower, what do they call a fire blower guy? Anyway, when he blows the gasoline out of his mouth to ignite, and do all these
The fire
dramatic
eater.
fire stuff. Huh?
The fire eater.
Yeah. They blow that gasoline in their mouth out.
Right.
There's like a distance like this that is unignited. Or rockets even. Rockets are the same way.
Right.
Anyway, but yeah, they did get divorced though, the couple. So.
Okay, so I think Julie, so Sue has added links in the Q&A for anyone who's looking at it. So Las Politas Nursery, which Greg, I believe you're a big fan of too. There's good information on their website, and also Tree of Life
Yeah.
Nursery has good information about watering and natives. And and
one thing Hope had tried to ask multiple times about just Greg's experience, whether he noticed if wood houses, how wood houses themselves fared in it. I told her it was a plant webinar, but she just wanted to see if Greg might be able to speak on that a little.
Well, I'll show you. This house was one of my clients. It survived 3 fire events. But this is 2007. This is the worst damage any of our houses ever suffered. Okay, and this was not far from where the Witch Creek fire. This is within a mile where the Witch Creek fire originated. Yeah, the wood burned. It was. They were able to. So this homeowner had a swimming pool and a gas-powered pump with a fire hose. And and I only learned of this recently. I thought they had completely unscathed. When that wooden shade structure started to ignite, they were able to start putting out the flames, and then it caught the windowsill right there, a little, not much siding there, just the window. It got in, it did a little bit of burn damage inside, but mostly smoke damage. And then they had to completely that's the kitchen. They had to redo the kitchen. So that's kind of how I see it. And ironically, this was the one section that we didn't do. The one section of the landscape, it was just flat flagstone, and that's where they hung their laundry. So it was not protected in this sense, So I don't know if I put an oak tree or sycamore on the other side of this thing. I wonder if that would have helped. I don't know. but the Witch Creek was a serious fire. It was a flashy fuel fire, and the embers. In fact, that picture of the firefighters with all the embers that might have actually come from Witch Creek. That's how bad it was.
And there's one question in Q and A in the chat, which I don't think you looked at, Stephanie. That
Oh, no.
what would you suggest for planting in a lot where our house burnt? Rebuilding maybe a year or more out. I want to be a good neighbor for those who rebuild sooner and would like to mitigate soil toxicity as well. Any thoughts?
Oh
He's
boy, so
he's
that's a
in
whole.
Altadena.
Yeah, that Altadena is a real situation with bioremediation. That soil is toxic.
I can address that really quickly if you'd like.
Go ahead.
I'll do a quick plug for 301 Organics, which is the website basically, but I've been working with them since February and they're doing really amazing work in Altadena. They're seeing soil toxicity levels plummet almost immediately when they're treating it with biologically activated compost and mulch and drench, and then overseeding it with phytoremediation. So 301 Organics is the website. And they can certainly help you with that. You can start planting, we're planting annuals now just to sort of absorb. What's happening is that they're testing for 17, besides the hydrocarbons, they're testing for 17 of the toxic metals, and most of those are actually being absorbed, and I'm not using exactly the right language, but being collected by the compost and the biology, and those levels are going down. But the few that are staying, it's a lot of chromium and cobalt and a little bit of lead, but the lead levels are going down pretty quickly too. But those plants will be absorbed by sunflowers and then they can be extracted.
So what I just wanted to mention about that, and there's a solution, and I think I talked about it to the group about it. I actually addressed one of the Altadena groups, and their whole focus was bioremediation. They were wondering if we could do it with natives. Well, you can to a point. I'm hearing that the soil amendments are being very effective, especially with lead, as you just said. The issue is when you come back and plant natives on top of that, it can be a little too much for them. Too rich, too organic. They kind of blow up, get buggy. But here's how you deal with it. You double plant with native perennials and wildflowers. Just what you're saying. Because
Right.
that will burn up a lot of that excess nutrition, and they'll also take up some of the heavy metals and stuff too. I think poppies might be pretty good for that, in fact. But also the salt bushes and stuff, the atriplex, selenium, and all kinds of
And
nasty.
buckwheat is actually really great at absorbing things too, but we're starting with native annuals so that they can be extracted and also so that we don't have to worry about preserving them through the construction process,
Exactly.
because that can be a
You
problem.
yank them, don't you? You just
And
remove them after.
yeah, and also in really contaminated sites, we have serpentine soils throughout the state anyway, so we have a lot of wildflowers, like poppies are one of them, that are adapted to growing in serpentine soils, which are naturally high in lead and asbestos and a bunch of other bad stuff. So we're starting with those too.
So you're using serpentine plants.
Yes, they're included in the mix.
Columbine and there's a few out there. Berg talks about on the Lost
Tips
Police
and
website, really
yeah,
good serpentine soil plants.
yeah.
That's fascinating. I love this stuff. I mean, you guys got a real problem out there. I mean, it's not nice, but I'm glad to hear it's, come along good.
So, but then, yeah, but moving forward, planting trees, it's really about what you can protect during the reconstruction process. I think is an important thing to consider, because there's going to be heavy equipment, and keeping your soil covered during all of that too, so that whatever toxins are in the soil don't get spread around and don't get airborne and don't go into the water and all of that. So,
It's a good use for the redwood mulch, which is very dense.
yeah.
And you want to be getting, your big mainframe trees, your oaks and your sycamores, and you're right, can't be within the construction zone, they'll get destroyed. Sometimes you can put orange fencing around it and hang dollar signs off it. Sometimes I get the boys the Tonka toys.
All right. Well, my dog is telling me it's time for her dinner, and I think we are way over at this point. But thank you, everyone who's hung out with us.